Welcome viewers to Module 9 on Globalization of Financial Markets and Classification of Global Financial Markets. Actually, globalization is a multidimensional entity. It actually encompasses different dimensions of globalization that is talked of today, like cultural, political, social, and economic. And among all the facets of globalization, financial globalization is very crucial because it takes into a network or an integrated structure of all its components. This basically leads to the concept of financial globalization as defined or observed in today's world. By financial globalization, we mean the activities of the different financial institutions, starting from banks, private institutions, intermediaries, and how they are correlating with themselves in channelization of funds and savings and resource mobilization. Financial globalization also takes care of borrowers and savers or investors or savers across the world. Thus, financial globalization is a very much updated and a crucial concept in today's dynamic world. This boils down to the motivations of the financial globalization. As we all know that the economies in the world are more accessible to openness. They go for market orientation, they go for adopting an outward-oriented strategy, and thereby go for more financial openness. In all these endeavors, the motivations are to be understood why a country will agree to financial globalization. Firstly, we see that the securities market becomes more robust when they integrate with the rest of the world. So when we talk about cross-border orientations, it's basically across the countries and the offshore activities which takes place and makes the securities market to be more strong in their functioning. Then we have the instances of attracting different stakeholders. Whenever we are inviting any multinational corporation, thereby the host country government develops its fundamentals to attract them. And at the same time, MNCs also try to make a kind of understanding or act as a catalytic role in the development of the entire economy. And moreover, the development paradigm or the development agenda definitely takes care of the liberalization move. For example, for Indian economy, as we know, that Indian economy adopted all the liberalized reforms in 1991. And after the adoption of that 1991 reforms, the cross-border flows have evolved and thereby it has come up with a broader shape. So the motivations basically lies in attracting the different stakeholders, then also looking for a more secure market, particularly for the bonds and securities, and make it more robust, and finally also to participate in the global financial flows. When we look after the other motivations behind the financial globalization, it looks into wider scheme of borrowing and lending possibilities. Whenever we look at the international rate of interest and the domestic rate of interest, obviously international rate of interest sometimes appear to be more attractive because from the cost of borrowing it may be lower, or from the cost of saving it may be higher. So whenever we are representing this kind of interest rate, international interest rate versus domestic interest rate, financial globalization plays an important role. Secondly, we observe about the financial possibilities that can come up. Most of the countries in the world are actually experiencing current account deficit, because most of them are dependent on the imports and exports are not susceptible to offset the rise in the imports. As a result, current account deficit comes in. So the question arises about the financing of the current account deficit. So in such cases, financial globalization plays an important role because by financing, we can attract the global capital flows or we can attract the FDI to make it more stable and robust. And hereby, we also can talk of the other side of the story for those countries we are enjoying current account surplus. So this current account surplus can be recycled or regenerated to actually serve the countries which are in deficit. And whenever we are serving the countries, we are basically looking in for the global countries, and that is possible if we integrate to the rest of the world. So in the context of current account deficit, or in the context of current account surplus, we observe that financial globalization gives us an access and also it makes it more liberal to the capital flows across the world. Moreover, when we consider the significant motivations of the sentiments for globalization, then it is always the adoption of a liberalized, export-oriented, outward-oriented mechanism. And that also calls for attracting more foreign capital to accelerate the growth and the developmental issues. Thereby, we open up for some questions in these discussions. The questions thereby go by that what do we mean by the financial globalization? Basically, by the word globalization, we mean integration to the rest of the world. But by financial globalization, we mainly refer to the access to world financial services, which may be dealing with the banks, maybe security market, maybe capital market, or the investments or the savings or borrowings, and also making a level playing field for the foreign investors to come in. So thereby, financial globalization is a very dynamic prospect of the entire policy of globalization, and it also encompasses the other dimensions too. If we look after the next question, which states that what are the motivations behind financial globalization? So to address this question, we should understand the basic motivations is actually encompassing the appeal to the international investors. That means how can the country become more and more lucrative and attractive for the international investors to come in so that they can go for cross-border flows, they can also experience a holistic growth, and thereby the country can move forward. And secondly also, in terms of the times of exigency, when the country is suffering from a high level of current account deficit, then financing the deficit can be done by borrowing capital from abroad. Or if the country is enjoying the surplus, then the surplus also can be recycled to get positive returns. So we observe that in both the aspects, financial globalization is actually taken up. So these are the motivations behind the policy of the financial globalization. Now we focus on why there had been rise in the growth of the financial globalization over time. Because most of the economies or majority of the economies in the world are actually pro-globalization, and they are also in favor of more and more financing services across the world. So what were the factors responsible for these reasons for the growth? First of all, definitely participating in the international trade. As we know that trade means exchange. So whenever we are participating in the trade, we are basically going for a specialization in our goods and services. All countries cannot be specialized in all goods and services. Thereby comes the question of import and export. So a country basically exports a product which is specialized and thereby imports which the country does not have. So this is a matter of exchange, and through trade we are basically making more and more openness, or we are creating a kind of a level playing field with the rest of the world. So trade has been an engine of growth in the economic forum and also in the economic world for a longer period of time. Trade has been accelerating the level of GDP of majority of the countries, and thereby the trade has also come in flows of foreign investment. So the international equity markets, the international foreign investments have been on the rise of the global economies, and if we go by the statistics, it has been doubled over the decade. It has been tripled over the decade, and so these are the results of financial globalization. This also explains the spread of the financial globalization over time. Next, we go by the exchange rate. Another very important dynamics of international trade and capital flows is the fluctuations of the exchange rate, because exchange rate can fluctuate according to market-determined forces. Though we follow a pegged exchange rate system or we follow a fixed exchange rate system, exchange rates are always volatile. So given the fluctuations of the exchange rates, we can see that the financial globalization has become more and more popular and famous. This is because with the terminal of the Bretton Woods system, which has actually come to the close of the fixed exchange rate system, we have come to the issue of fluctuations and volatilities. And thereby financial globalization can help to reduce the volatility to a certain extent when we are engaging more than one securities market or more than one stock markets. So this also calls for the saying how the stock markets are integrated together. That is also one of the dynamics or one of the aspects of the financial globalization. Thirdly, we look after the risk management. Whenever we are talking about a domestic business and we differ it from an international business, the major point of departure is the risk-taking attitude and how the risk management can be done. For a domestic business, the risk cover is very less. But for an international investor, the risk is very high. So whenever a country participates in international trade, whenever the producer wants to participate in international trade, thereby the risk insurance models needs to be developed. Whether there is any protective shield against the risk, because this risk can be related to the offshore risk and the onshore risk. Offshore risk is when the goods and services are already dispatched from the home country and it has already reached offshore, but it has not been marketed. So there can be loss of transit, there can be delay in the delivery, so all this will add up the cost. And that is why we can see that the risk will be huge. So how to take care of the risk, that can be done in consultation with the trading partner, and that can be possible under the openness or under the liberalized policy when the country is adopting in terms of this. Moreover, today we talk a lot about artificial intelligence models, we talk a lot about technological innovations. So whenever the country is exposed to technological innovations, thereby financial globalization gives them a right access. Because by technology transfer, we can import technology, we can import capital, and that can be cost saving, and that can be cost reducing, and that can add on to more productivity of the sector. So financial globalization also leads with the technology transfer or the technology innovations. Now we can concentrate on some of the other reasons which are responsible for the growth of the international transactions or financial globalization over time. Moreover, when we take care of the Germany, where the capital controls were abolished. So once the controls and the restrictions were dismantled, the country becomes more and more access, and thereby the free trade can be practiced. So as a matter of the free trade, we can see in 1979 for the UK, for 1980 for Japan, and for India for 1991, all the countries are basically connected or globalized through a common network. And this network is just like a chain where all the countries are integrated together. Another point, as it being said, about the concept of the derivatives or the instruments, which are basically derived from the securities. So whenever we are talking about the financial innovations or the financial globalization, it's about the trading of the risk and what are the factors which are associated with the businesses. Most of the factors we find out that they are related with the domestic fundamentals like land acquisition or political stability or about the labor problems. So when we are engaging the other countries, we can even go for labor transfer or we can say resource transfer. That can also be taken up in the era of financial globalization or instruments. Moreover, if we concentrate on some of the socio-economic factors, as we can see the demographic changes. This is very important because when we look at the demographic structure or the population structure, we have the concept of old age and young age. If the ratio of the old age is on the rise, then there is a possibility of rise in the pension funds. So how to manage the funds, how to sponsor the funds, this can be a question from the government's point of view. So in that case, if financing of the pension funds can be done by attracting the global capital, then there would be less stress on the domestic country. And thereby, pension funds can be better managed if we open up the country for more and more globalization, where the demographic structure consists of higher age or older age people. Even for the younger age, financial globalization can give access to more and more technological gadgets, which might improve the technological capacity and the productive capacity of the economy. Then we have the financial services which has come up. Today we observe the IT-enabled services, which are basically rising at a very increasing rate. So given the cutthroat competition of the world economy and the dynamics of the cutthroat competition, we can see that by the financial globalization, risks can be reduced by engaging a lot of trading partners or international partners. Then we go for the role of ICT. As we can see, for Indian economy, the IT revolution has been stupendous. And like India, there are many global economies where the IT revolution has ended up with a tremendous flow of goods and services and tremendous flow of financial globalized accessibility products. And what is the result? The result is very straightforward, that in international communications have evolved, managing and transferring funds have become more smoother, and that have increased over time. This also calls for demat accounts. This also calls for a more sophisticated business orientation in the capital market and making the financial globalization on a broader reach. So now we open up for the questions related to these discussions. The question is given in the way that what are the reasons responsible for the growth of international financial transactions? Why these international financial transactions have been on the rise over time? What had been the catalytic factors? Firstly, trade. As we can see, openness to trade, as we can see, the trade or the specialization made the financial globalization more comfortable and lucrative, attracting the international investors. Secondly, the fluctuations and the volatilities in the exchange rate can be shared with the international partners, so risks can be reduced to a certain extent. Capital controls, if are relaxed, then financial globalization becomes more accessible. Then the innovations, if they come in the form of financial structure, it becomes more spread out. Demographic changes are very important because it looks after the capital structure and also about the population structure, where we look after the dependency ratio rising, so pension funds may be on the rise, but financing pension funds can be done as a result of this financial globalization. Financial services have come up in a broader picture, and definitely the role of ICT is stupendous in this regard. Now we focus on the agents of globalized financial markets. One of the crucial agents is the government, because it is the government which decides on the policy of liberalization, and thereby the effectuation will take place. If we look at the role of the governments in this case, then it regulates the domestic financial sector, and thereby it creates a provision for the openness. And secondly, also the restrictions also can be lifted up by the government policy. Secondly, we have the agent of borrowers and investors. When we look at the borrowers or the investors, they are basically the households and the firms who are main participatory agents of financial globalization. Firms actually take up many financing decisions, thereby participates in the bonds and the equity market. And also we look at the foreign investors also to come up in this process. So foreign investors also correlate with the banks and also with the borrowers and the investors. Then we have the financial institutions. Financial institutions are needed at the organizational level who will be pivotal or driving force in this international globalization. For example, we look at the regulatory system, we look at the governance, we look at the law and order, and thereby the financial globalization becomes more and more robust and pronounced. So, regarding the agents of the financial globalization, we can refer to this question as highlight on the agents of globalized financial markets. Mainly the three agents can be identified, who are government, borrowers and investors, and definitely the financial institutions which are at the organizational level. Now we move on to how the financial globalization can be effective in financial sector development, because both are interconnected to each other. Whenever we look at the financial globalization, it is basically rise in the economic surpluses, which means availability of funds will be on the rise. Secondly, when we look at the financial globalization, financial infrastructure would also come up, because it looks after the problem of asymmetric information, because if there is any gap in the information, then will be more possibility of frauds or any kind of unscrupulous activities. And finally, financial globalization also makes more and more easy availability of the credit, because the savings or the economic surpluses are on the rise. Now we are focusing on the very important aspect of this financial globalization, whether any risk is involved in this process or not. Because here the countries are directly exposed to the outside world and the abroad, where exchange rate volatilities, where the volatilities of the markets, stock markets and many other transmission channels will be there. So is there any risks involved to it? The first of all is about a kind of a discipline which was followed in the domestic economy, maybe by the sentiments of the traditional people that make it disturbed because of globalization. And that can open up with major developments or the major randomness in the economy. Secondly, when the economy is closed, then the economic fundamentals are actually in a very conservative approach. But whenever the economy opens up, all the conservatism goes away, and it is basically being directed by the domestic factors and more influenced by the global factors. Thirdly is about the over-optimism in the good times makes the country to attract a lot of capital, and during the time of the depression, it may happen that the capitals may dry out. So this will lead to a liquidity crunch in the domestic economy and make the economy to be at the verge of huge financial risk. If we look at the other crisis or the other problems is regarding any kind of economic crisis in any part of the world will have its impact on the globalized economies. Maybe the epicenter may be in any part of the world, but the countries will feel the tremors, and thereby the financial markets, the bubbles will be created, and that will get burst. More importantly, there are certain imperfections in the capital market which can also come up. And also the speculations about the future might not be at par with the expectations of the investors or the borrowers, what we can say. So this basically leads to a country to be too much dependent on the foreign capital. Then any kind of shift in the foreign capital may lead to depressions or may lead to downturns. That means the country's resilience power needs to be built up. How the country will be able to absorb the economic shocks. And finally, the cyclical movements that are also very important, because the cyclical movements may be affected in a diversification of the globalization. Investments may be diversified, portfolio management may have to be done. So all these steps can be taken at the time of exigency, and the country has to bear the risk. Moreover, there is a contagion effect. For example, we look at the pandemic, which may be a health crisis, but it ended up with a financial crisis. So this is how the transmission takes place across the different parts of the world, and financial globalization is actually one of the roots for the contagion effects. And obviously, the lack of proper information across the different countries, which is called asymmetric information or a communication gap, can be one of the factors. So, regarding the risk, we can actually go for that what are the risks arising out of financial globalization? That is due to the changes in fundamentals, imperfections, and contagion effect. Apart from the risk, we have also certain benefits. For example, the openness of the financial sector, the expansion of the financial sector, development of skills, expertise, technology transfer, ICT, that is playing a very important role, and also a coverage on the global bond market. These are some of the positivities or the merits that can be drawn out of the financial globalization. And in order to reap the benefits, the country should develop the skill sector, the country should develop the IT sector, more integration is being needed. For global bond market, more accessibility is being needed, and this can be also come up. So now we go for the final questions for the benefits part, that what are the benefits which can come up? That is definitely skill development, IT sector development, and moreover development on the holistic fundamentals. And how can the benefits of globalization can be reaped? By building a strong fundamental or a macroeconomic stability to have a more resilience power to avoid the risk. So as we sum up on this particular module, we can highlight on the major points, like on the concept of the financial globalization, which is integration mainly. What are the motivating factors behind financial globalization, why that is called up? What can be the reasons for the sudden upsurge or the rise in the financial globalization? Moreover, who are the agents who will bear the torch? Who are the actually agents for the risk factors and the benefits? What can be the role in the financial sector development? And finally, how the country can bear the benefits of the financial globalization. This is very important because financial globalization can be a blessing if the country's domestic fundamentals and the policy making is in the right step.